everyone. Today we have Casey Lepper on the podcast. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is one of my favorite episodes I've ever done. The team all agreed it was excellent. We talked about relationships. We talked about kids. We talked about conflict resolution in marriages. We talked about raising emotionally mature kids. We talked about body image and food around your kids. We talked about so many applicable, incredible things. You got to go follow Casey on her YouTube and on her Instagram. She's a really, really good follow. Casey Lepper on both YouTube and on Instagram. So without further ado, here is Casey Lepper. Okay, so there are the 4 horsemen that lead to divorce. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but I've heard about this before, and then I saw it on your social media. What is that?
So the 4 horsemen is a concept that's put forth by John Gottman and Julie Gottman. So Dr. John Gottman is really popular in the couples world because he's studied couples for 5 decades now. And they were doing it a little different, where they brought couples into what was dubbed a love lab. It was like an apartment, and they hooked them up with biometric devices and saw the behavior. And so they got all of this data about what made couples work. And through just watching them unfold and being able to see how satisfied were they, a year after the study, 10 years after the study, and then more longitudinal studies. And so the 4 horsemen describes 4 main patterns that we handle conflict. And one of those is criticism, and then defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And so they're really good to know what your patterns are, because then once you see it, you realize this is creating more of an issue. It's creating a loop. And a lot of times what happens with couples is we're arguing about the same thing over and over, and we're not really getting anywhere. And it's that loop and that continuation of not having anything productive come from it that drains couples ultimately. And usually within the first year of a relationship, we have a solidified pattern of how we handle conflict. And so if we're feeling really drained by it, then we have to ask, well, what's going wrong? What are the patterns? And so if I'm working with a couple, I'll look and I'll see, okay, she's getting defensive and he's getting critical. Of those, contempt is the worst. It's the highest predictor of divorce. And it's very similar to criticism, but with an edge of superiority. So it would be like my husband's doing the dishes, and I say, you do the dishes completely wrong. What's wrong with you? So it's that little bit of edge that's trying to push someone down.
It's like a criticism that's also underlying, like, judging their moral character.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So contempt can also include sarcasm, because it can be disguised a little bit. So it can be sarcasm, but it's higher, like there's a hierarchy to how someone's trying to push someone down. So something's wrong with your character, something's wrong with you. It could be as overt as you're a loser, or a little more hidden with sarcasm.
Yeah, which I think probably is unfortunately very common.
Yes. Yeah.
So if someone is because I would love to talk about, like, if you were the one that's behaving that way, which I think is very important for people to see about themselves. And then also if someone is getting treated that way. Mm-hmm. So what are the 2 ways to kind of improve both of those scenarios? Like if you're the one doing it, or if you're the one who your partner is doing that for you? With
contempt specifically? Yeah. So the thing about contempt is usually it's a pattern that when you've been in a relationship long term, and you haven't, you don't feel satisfied by it, that's when contempt can come up, or when there's a lot of stacked up resentments. And so it almost can come, if I was experiencing contempt, the first thing that I would do for myself, like the healthiest thing to do, is to know where you need to take responsibility and where you can't take responsibility. So if someone's being pushed down by the person they love long term, that usually creates a tendency to feel less than. And so it really impacts self-worth, self-confidence. And the longer you stay in that relationship for whatever reason, the more likely you are at losing a part of yourself. And so contempt, if again, the person that you're supposed to be in a committed, loving relationship with is pushing you down, then there might be a certain point where you say, well, I'm not good enough. So you play into it and you almost start to live your life like you're not doing anything correctly.
Oh, that's so sad.
It is sad. It is sad.
But how do you get your power back in that situation?
It can look like different ways. So to speak personally, my relationship before I met my husband was with a pretty intense narcissist. And we tend to meet people who have the same psychological wounding as we do. And
Really?
so the great thing about that is it shows you where your work is. But usually, we don't always approach relationships with that level of awareness that they're here to teach us something. And you're here to learn about how you can be better or what you need to heal or what you need to improve. And so for me, I was already graduated from my undergrad in psychology. And I was in grad school for counseling and marriage therapy. And it took me until the very end to see that I was being treated a really poor way. And what happened to me is I did one session of counseling and I told the therapist what was happening and just the empathy he gave me. And he just gave me this reflection that he's saying what? And it was this little bit of clarity that I hadn't seen, because you enter into a relationship expecting that the other person is going to have your back. And when these little contemptuous acts happen and you feel like, okay, I'm messing up, let me try to be better. And it fell directly into my psychological wounding, which was perfectionism. And so I was carrying,
this is good. He pushes me to be better.
Exactly. It was playing perfectly into it. And it wasn't until I got that little bit of outside feedback that I got to see it's not the healthiest relationship.
Because were your friends telling you that? Or was it one of those things that you were maybe like sugarcoating to your friends?
As we were together for 4 years, initially I was seeing these reactions of my friends. And what happened was we stopped hanging out with those friends. So the mirrors, I had less and less mirrors. And that's what happens when you're with someone who either is somewhat narcissistic or contemptuous.
Wow. Is that you'll start to lose friends and relationships?
You'll be isolated.
Right.
And so again, if you feel like something's not right in this relationship, I don't feel supported, I don't feel cared for, or there's not warmth or there's not admiration, then you can seek out a mentor and counselor or ask the people who you know are going to be really direct and give you the honest feedback.
Yeah. So if you're someone who's in a relationship where that's happening and to you, and you want to stay in the relationship, are there ways I'm guessing counseling might be the best route for that?
Once contempt has started, it means that there's been such a buildup of resentment, issues, and poor patterns. And so a lot of times couples come into me and they're at a place where things are just a mess because nothing's been organized. And so how I look at it is, if you're in a marriage for 5 years and you never do work to clean it up, think about stacking old trash and items you don't care about and old, all your baggage in one room for 5 years. How long is it going to take to clean that up?
Right.
And it's really hard if the people coming into it don't have the skills.
Right.
And so first, if I was the one acting contemptuous, I would have to ask myself, do I truly like this person? Do I really respect them? Sometimes we lose respect in relationships and we don't really care about the person, so we bring out our worst self in it. So it's not always compared, or it's not always present in people who are just narcissistic or unhealed. It can also come as a result of not really being satisfied or liking the person, not being inspired by the person.
And it's just a buildup over time.
Yeah.
What about the other three? So that one's the worst.
Yes.
What about, and I guess we didn't touch on, like, if you are the one that is being contemptuous. Is contemptuous a word? Contemptuous? Yeah. If you are the one that is being contemptuous, is there coming back from that?
It would take a lot of work. It is the highest, once it's present, it's the highest predictability of divorce. So it usually means there's been such a long road. Most couples don't even come into therapy until like 7 years after there's issues. So there's already a buildup, but contempt, you can come back from it, but it takes a lot of healing, letting go of the past, being able to acknowledge how both people have been responsible to let it get there, because it's not just one person, it's both people. And so the other ones are easier signs to see that you can head off at the pass.
Yes.
And they're mostly a result of some sort of adaptation we had in childhood. So for instance, if you are in an argument with your partner and you get really critical, usually you probably saw criticism growing up. And so when we think about being connected or being attracted to people who have the same psychological wounding as us, that's where you get to see, oh, I'm being really critical of my partner. Let me explore more. How is this attached to my childhood, or am I being critical of myself? So I'm projecting it onto my partner. More of a behavioral aspect of it is if you're criticizing, you have to change how you are bringing problems up with your partner. So you have to be more diligent, and instead of pointing the finger and blaming them, you have to take a little bit more responsibility and talk from your own point of view. So again, when we get into arguments, a lot of times it's you haven't done the dishes in forever. You never do the dishes. Instead of I'm a little frustrated, you haven't done the dishes. That's a very different way to approach it.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great example. And you could do the same with defensiveness and stonewalling.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's what was going to be my next question is what is a healthy way to, because this kind of leads into parenting too, because you mentioned like a lot of times your conflict resolution will be based on how you were raised and what you observed your parents doing. So what is a mature way to handle conflict with your partner?
One piece is I think if we all acknowledge that when we're in a relationship, we can't expect every conflict to be completely resolved. That there's a huge percentage of problems that are going to be perpetual. And so I think that ratio or that statistic is about 69%. And so we go into a conflict wanting to win a lot of times instead of wanting to understand. And so the best change that couples can get into is when you're feeling tense with your partner, and instead of wanting to win, you ask more questions and you seek to understand.
Awesome. Which is hard to do when you're in an emotional state. So let's say you're angry or you're frustrated or you are having an emotional response. How is it one of those things where it's like, okay, step away before you come to that person with the conflict, or what's the best route to do when you're having an emotional response that sometimes people see red?
Yeah.
And they can't, they're like, I love to learn all of this, but like in the moment, I'm not able to apply this.
Right. Yeah, when we are physiologically aroused like that, we're not the best at handling things. There's a lot of, neurological reason why we're not in our prefrontal cortex, we're more in our limbic brain. And I think about this in terms of kids all the time. So when they're in the toddlers, they are in their limbic brain a lot. They're feeling aggression or they're feeling large amounts of emotion. And that's not the time that you can really reason through anything. So if you're in a relationship and you're feeling really angry, you have to acknowledge you're not going to be able to make a good point. Your partner, if they're triggered, they're probably not going to hear you very clearly. And so stonewalling is the attempt to soothe the system because it's been flooded. And flooded is when we continue to feel angry and we're still trying to talk and they're not getting our point. So we're trying to, put even more emotional energy and we're getting frustrated. And then our nervous system has been so dysregulated that we're not taking in new information. We're not applying any problem solving because literally nothing's going to the prefrontal cortex.
Wow. It's almost like the fight, flight, freeze.
Absolutely.
Like the freeze portion of fight or flight.
Yeah.
Because remind the audience what stonewalling is and me.
So stonewalling is when during an argument you shut down. And so it can feel like, one partner is trying to talk to you and either you've completely left, like you're just numb, or so you've left emotionally or you've left physically.
Okay. Okay. So
And
it can be
men
like silent
tend to-
treatment, the silent
yes.
treatment, or okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's stonewalling, and we talked about contempt. I also want to talk about defensiveness, and we talked a little about criticism too.
Yeah.
Defensiveness.
Defensiveness is you come to me and you tell me something that I've done and I put it right back on you. And I say, well, you never do this. Or, well, when's the last time you did that? So I don't take any responsibility and I just push it back on you. And this happens a lot because if either how one person is talking to the other. So if I'm coming in more of an attack mode, then that nervous system is likely to get triggered. You're going to either freeze, which is the stonewall, or attack, which is the criticism, contempt, or defensiveness.
Right.
And so if you're in a pattern, defensiveness is very common. If you're in this pattern and you handle things defensively, and as soon as you hear some information about yourself, you want to push it back onto someone, that's when you have to take a pause and just take responsibility. Yeah. And that's when you just seek to understand their feelings and understand. So ask more questions and, not take it so personal and try to understand the other person's side.
Yeah. I've been through a journey of trying to improve my emotional maturity over the last, 5 years, and I've come a long way. But one of the tools that I've really found that has been helpful in relationships in particular is to take space from the situation. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody says that, but it's like until you take space, breathe a little bit, and then it's almost like I can't see my husband's side of things until I do that. Because if we're just talking, it's almost like it escalates. And it's like, unless I remove myself for a little bit and let my nervous system almost calm down. It's kind of like what you're talking about. Yeah. Let your nervous system regulate and then come back. Then I find he softens too. Yeah. A lot of times but maybe it's because he also got the space to breathe and think for a second. So I think that this is really important because us thinking about how we want to handle conflict in front of our children. And one thing I'd be interested to hear all of your thoughts around handling conflict in front of your children. Do you fight in front of the kids? Do you not fight in front of the kids? Where do you stand there?
Well, we all, we're human.
Yeah. Yes.
And so what I would love, I had friends growing up that said they never saw their parents fight. And that could be a really great thing, but there is something to be said. Your kids are absorbing everything, and they're seeing, and kids fight. That there's a natural training and skills that can be learned around conflict. And so, while I don't prefer to get into the more, the heightened state of fighting, being able to let the kids see healthy discourse, even if it's tense, even if it's uncomfortable, but the repair and resolution.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we expect, kids to be completely purified by, they don't see that and we don't want them to see it. But being able to see we make mistakes and we do something to repair that mistake, I think lets them realize they're a work in progress too.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Them seeing the full thing.
Yes.
And also understanding that, it doesn't need to be the end of the world because we made up and we love each other. And I think that's huge. So what about keeping connections alive? It seems like, a lot of those 4 horsemen can maybe stem into other areas of your relationship. So keeping a connection alive even when you have kids, how do couples do this?
I think there's a lot of things that get in the way of this. Yeah. So when it comes to parenting, I noticed a trend. There's so much information out there, and women have a tendency to want to be able to take in all the information and apply it. And so it's created the more guilty, stressed mom.
I am this person. Yes.
Yeah. And this goes back to the repair piece where if you have a conflict with someone and you repair, the kids are learning okay, you can make mistakes.
Yeah.
And so we want to be perfect moms or as perfect of a parent as we can, not realizing that our missteps and our mistakes, if we come back and repair with a child correctly, that they're learning, I can fail and make a mistake.
Yes.
I can come back from this. I don't have to, everything doesn't have to be in its perfect place.
Right. Right. That is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
Extremely valuable.
So because women, we are in a trend of carrying so much responsibility on our shoulders, and we're not really taking care of ourselves in the most holistic way. I know with your audience, they're taking care of themselves physically, but also we need to take care of ourselves mentally, energetically, I think spiritually. I think all of it together allows us to be really strong on all levels. It serves to really strengthen our foundation as parents. Yeah. But because we have so much information out there and there's so many methods of how to do it perfectly, women have lost their intuition about what works best for them.
Wow.
And so women are a little tense and stressed and not soft and not relaxed. And so they're coming into the parenting process a little bit more dysregulated. And so then, anyone who has a family, and if mom is good, usually the rest of the family energetically follows mom. She is the pillar of the family. Moms and dads do different things, but the role of mom is to provide the womb. She provides the energy for the whole house.
Yeah.
So if she's not feeling fulfilled or comfortable or replenished, then the stress of the family you can see it in every single dynamic with the family. And then I think how that bleeds over into relationships is she's kind of running a business for the family,
she's the
and that there's
CEO.
not the softness, there's not the spontaneity, not the play. And how I see this come out in families all the time is she is so inundated with the responsibilities, and he gets to be the fun one, but she's not realizing she can take some of the things off that list. She can be more graceful with herself. She can prioritize her own self-care on all the levels, and then she'll be a more fun parent. And so that flow is easier. So I think about a seesaw. If one person is always the fun one and one person's always the one holding the responsibilities, then there's no movement. And that's where a lot of issues come.
I can hear a lot of women saying, that all sounds great, but if I don't do it, nobody will.
And you have to ask what happened first, the chicken or the egg. Did you just get into the routine of I'm the only one doing it the right way, so I'm going to do it? Can you be more flexible in what the right way looks like? Can you be can you stand back and see how your partner can take and, step in? And this has come up in my own relationship too. I come from a long line of women who will just get stuff done and like grin it and bear it and just push and push. Yeah. And part of my psychological but also spiritual training was pushing me to say and to realize I can't always be doing, that my value isn't tied onto how much money I make or how productive I am. And I wasn't giving myself any space. And when I was pregnant with my second child, my girl, it just felt like the universe just pushed me into saying the pendulum must swing, and you need to step back from how you've been doing things. It wasn't sustainable. And during that second pregnancy, I was pushing new business ideas, and I was just feeling so responsible. And for me to rewrite that pattern took a willing partner who knew I was trying to pull back and create space. But my program was written that if he wasn't doing it how I wanted, then I'll just do it.
Right.
And so you can restructure it. You have to give a little space for the experimentation and the integration of that. So if a woman says, if I don't do it, no one else will, how much time are you actually giving to let them do it?
Right.
Because it's all a balance. And so when we're in better balance, then again, because we're holding the energy of the home and the family and the emotional energy of a relationship usually, if we start to shift, we'll get to see if they come in and they shift. And sometimes they don't. But a lot of times they do.
Right. Because you've opened space for it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think, a lot of what you're saying is resonating with me personally. I think I've always been, a high achiever and have big goals for myself in business. And of course, I want to be a perfect parent. And I also want to do all the things. I want to maintain my friendships. I want to see my family enough. There's so many things on my plate that I've put on my plate willingly. But as you're saying this, I'm like, I would love to be softer, because one thing that I've personally been struggling with is being fully present with my daughter and not thinking about the 50 other things that I have to do. So what are some tools that people can use to be more present and be more soft in the moment?
The first thing that comes up is asking, what is your true priority list? So women tend to put family first, then maybe business, then marriage, then themselves. And I did that too. And I had one of my mentors tell me, she's like, you have to change, because nothing's working that way.
Right.
And she said, you have to put yourself at the top. And that's when I said, okay, I'm starting and I'm structuring my life based on what is going to fuel me. And for me is exercise is creative, like something I can do creatively that's just about process, not outcome, to correct that, achieving, producing.
Oh, that's interesting. Say more about that.
So the creative, we don't give ourselves a ton of space to be creative. We can do it in business, but it's still based on outcome. So a lot of my individual clients are, high achieving CEO business owners that are women run, and that their creativity can be funneled into the business, but that it's still about the numbers. It's still about what the investment is. So there's almost a cap on it.
Right.
And so for me, I had to figure out, what am I doing every single day that is just the process of creation? And I've been looking at bouquet classes, and fashion is one of them for my kids too. Like, I love to pick out their outfits. Traveling is a way to do it. So being able to access that creative energy that isn't connected to some productive reward.
Right.
It's like actually honoring the process and the presence of just letting creation unfold.
Wow. Yeah. I think that is a very, very good applicable tool. Because again, I'm talking about myself, but I hopefully the listeners can also relate. I think I'm a creative person, and I funnel it all to my business, all of it.
Yeah.
And I don't leave any of it for just doodling or as a kid, I used to doodle and draw and art and all the time. And I remember it used to be kind of how I would sort through emotions was writing or drawing or whatever. And as an adult, I'm I don't have time for that. But you're sounding you're making it sound like that actually creates more space in your life.
It does. Right. Yeah. When I was going through my my crisis of having to shift my whole operating system when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I think there's something about being pregnant with a daughter too that made me have to see these are things that you're just going to pass on to her if you don't figure them out.
Yes.
And one of my mentors she said, my ego is always going to push me into the masculine. So it's always going to tell me that I just need to grit and bear it, that I always just work. And so I had to be really, really, I wrote down, I was methodical about what creative things bring me joy and doing more of. And when I shifted how I was prioritizing, so I was prioritizing the creative outlet, the physical aspect, mental work, spiritual work. When I started putting that's how I break up my day. That's the routine. The structure is, am I giving time for myself every single day? That isn't just, what am I absorbing? So I thought about this concept of a mental diet. So what am I reading? What am I absorbing through friendships? I had to clear out friendships that weren't inspiring me, weren't recharging me or filling me up. I changed kind of all the habits that were actually draining me when I thought that, without checking, I thought they were replenishing me. And that from that place, then I was able to give more of myself because I was actually nourishing myself. And so I think about when you're working out and you haven't eaten anything all day, that workout's going to seem a lot harder, and you're not going to feel you're going to feel positively impacted by it, but it's not going to be as magnifying.
Right.
And so that's the nourishment, and nourishing yourself on all the levels. And the creative piece is something that we miss, but is absolutely foundational to being human, and especially a woman.
Right. When you went through this process, because your kids are close in age, they're
less than 2 years.
Less than 2 years.
Yeah.
So did you see any sort of difference in your son when you kind of went through this journey for yourself, or your marriage?
Yes, definitely. So when I had my son, that's when I realized I had to start reprioritizing myself. But I was still pushing a lot. I was still hard on myself. If I didn't work out a day, I would have that voice that would come out and, push me and say I couldn't relax. So that work hadn't commenced yet. But when I started prioritizing myself, well, first the pull to take care of my son was so extreme that I've worked with many moms in my career, and before I would give the worst advice. I was so humbled by how strong that pull is that you don't really want to leave them. You don't want to go on vacation. You don't I felt I'd get finished with clients and I'd want to go directly home. Yeah. I wouldn't stop at the mailbox. It was just so it was so intense.
Does not matter the errands you have to run.
No.
You're like, get me home.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I went through a refinement of what it was that I would actually put time towards. It restructured what I thought was important, what I didn't. It allowed a lot of things to drop.
Right.
And I think because my partner is really, really present and will hear all of my ideas and wanted to go along the journey of being a conscious parent with me, that it helped bring us all in together.
Yes.
It wasn't like a dictatorship. It didn't feel like I was bringing him in on a lot of the ideas. And so the way that we parented our son, I felt like we set such a good foundation for that.
Yes.
Because it was about 2 months after I gave birth that I realized the way I was doing things could no longer work.
Right. Well, and the difference between 1 and 2 is probably very different and enlightening.
Yeah.
Again, talking about mirrors, like it probably gives you a mirror to be like, oh, wait, I need to change something. This isn't going to work because this new thing in my life is now showing me that I need to prioritize things differently in order to prioritize her.
Yeah.
So I am really interested in raising kids. I think so many women struggle with the feeling of not being enough, and this is kind of underlying a lot of what you're talking about, both with conflict and like with parenting, is just not feeling like you're enough. And if we want to raise kids that feel like they're enough and are confident and are emotionally mature, what are things that we can do as parents? And I know you've kind of already spoke to some of that, but can you speak to that even deeper?
I think so. There's a Carl Jung quote, who is a really famous early psychologist. And one of his quotes was always in my mind as we had my son Atlas and my daughter Noble, but was coming and highlighting a lot while I was pregnant with Atlas. And it was, your kids basically start where you leave off. And so your unlived life will be projected onto them.
Whoa.
And realizing that my responsibility was basically to be as fulfilled in my own potential as I could. And that's what made prioritizing myself easy, because while I was leaving him to go do things that I needed to do, and I travel out of town for 4 to 6 weeks out of the year for my spiritual progression, which means leaving the kids or maybe bringing them with us. And it's taking time away from them. But my measurement was, am I a better version of myself? Can I stand more grounded in my highest self? And am I more present with them? So am I reaching a higher potential in the things that I'm doing? And so when I thought, if I'm present with them, or if I'm with them but not present with them, and I feel that sort of tension of, where do I need to put my energy or my attention? I need to write these emails. I need to, all the lists of the things that were going on in my mind.
Yeah.
When I realized and heard that quote and realized we can protect our children from not feeling good enough by, when we're with them, they see we're fully with them, that we don't have to be perfect, that we can make mistakes, that we're always a work in progress. And if I'm doing things that make me feel fulfilled and I feel in service to something bigger than myself, and I'm coming back to them, then they're going to feel that, because there's going to be a sense of peace inside myself and a piece of joy. Yeah. And so within some of the spiritual teachings that I follow, joy comes when you're in alignment with your own soul. Right. Not happiness. Happiness comes after a stimulus. But joy is a state of being where, after you go through necessary struggle and when you're really in alignment for the work that you should be doing, when you're on a mission versus a job, when you're doing things that are really rewarding you from the inside out, then your kids are going to see that on you, and that's going to be their standard. Right.
Well, I think so many parents maybe have kids, and I think this is common but sad. I think maybe a lot of people have kids in hopes that child will fulfill something broken within them. Mm-hmm. And therefore, and then when that kid doesn't live up to that, then they haven't had that need met. The parent hasn't had that need met, which of course a lot of times a kid can't meet that need inside of them. They need to meet it through themselves. So how do you see, if a parent is listening and like, okay, that could be me, how could you recognize that within yourself, and how could you shift that?
Whenever we're projecting some of our unhealed or unrealized aspirations on our child, there is going to be a sense of attachment. So to give a practical example, this happens a lot with body image.
Yes.
Where if someone has struggled with body image and they are very particular about like what beauty looks like physically, and their child, say, is overeating or eating too much or the sugar or whatever, then when you come to your child, there's going to be an edge of how you're saying it to them. It's not going to come from a pure teaching moment of, well, maybe we can curb what we're eating and this is better for you. But there's an attachment, so it's going to feel tight. It's going to feel full of contraction. And there's not going to be a sense of like peace or wisdom coming from you.
Right.
And so physical appearance is such a common way that women pass on to their daughters. Productivity and achievement, particularly with career and money, is very masculine. So my husband, his father is much shorter than him. He's my height. And I remember him saying, he pushed my husband to all the sports. And if he didn't want to do the sport, it was not an option to quit. And that each one of those interactions felt really hostile and unfair. Like there was no true discourse. There was no seeking of understanding. And I remember his dad saying, there's some people that God just touch. And if God touches you, you have to do what he touches you with. And I thought, well, I think, to speak about spirit, we're all embedded with certain skills, and we can use those skills in many different ways. But it showed me that because he wasn't 6 feet tall, because he didn't have the athletic ability he wanted, because he didn't have that opportunity, he forced it on him.
Right.
And so then you look at the story and the narrative and how everything unfolded, and he was disappointed that he wasn't something that he wanted to be. So he wanted to make sure that his son was exactly who he wanted to be,
right,
not really considering who he is.
Right.
And so when it comes to mom stress and mom guilt and all of like being a perfect parent, I think if you take a step back and you just look at how the child is and who they are, I do believe they come fully formed, and you're here to guide them and you're here to teach them things, but they know what they're interested in. Every bit of my work on mastery, it talks about these people like Charles Darwin or Leonardo da Vinci who were given the space to follow their instinct, and they created something extraordinary with it.
Wow.
And we all have that. So if I step back, I see who my daughter is, I see who my son is, and I let them be interested in the things that they're interested in.
Yes.
And so friction and conflict and, the developmental stages are a lot harder when you're trying to form them into a box.
Right, right. Or you're like, I see so much potential in you. I know that you could be really good at this.
Yeah.
And so just keep trying. And I mean, I'm sure there's part of parenting that is like, okay, I've got to teach you discipline. We're not just going to quit everything we start. So what's the boundary between like teaching your kid discipline and pushing them too far?
I think discipline is so much easier to achieve when you're connected to the thing that you're doing. And I do think kids naturally, when they're given the time to learn about the thing they're interested in, I don't see discipline being a huge problem.
Oh, interesting.
But I think our school system is a little out of sorts, and this is going to be kind of a tangent, but
it's okay, tangent away.
We teach kids that they need to learn for an outcome, for test scores, to get into a good college. It's always do this and then. And that framework is so toxic to all of us.
And do it as perfectly as possible.
Exactly. Not enjoy what you're doing and everything will unfold how it needs to. Mm-hmm. And so we're living in a beautiful time where there's a lot more options to teaching kids this way. So yes, a child gets hurt at a basketball game and doesn't want to do it, that's when you can come in and guide, like, do you find joy when you're playing basketball? And you'll be able to see it on them. And so if you're stepping back from yourself and just acknowledging, like, what's going on, when a child is interested, they're usually much more committed. And when they're bored, they're less so. And I think the school system somewhat teaches that, or a lot of school systems do.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that my parents did was foster the creativity, and they let me just like try things. And if I wasn't good at sports, and they knew that, and they were like, you don't like this, it's okay. We don't have to keep going. It's fine. It's no worries. Like, they were so good about that. And they were like, but you do like this. Like, why don't you explore this? And they really gave me so much room to explore and try. And I think that that's part of the reason why I became an entrepreneur, because I knew through their example that it's possible to create something out of nothing and to do something out of the box, out like, not just follow a path of like just be a physical therapist forever, but go do something else. And so I credit my parents a lot for that. And I think a lot of kids or adults now weren't raised like that. So what you're saying speaks to me, and I want to be like that with my daughter, but I feel I worry about being like that, because I think I'm a lot more like, I've become a lot more type A perfectionist over time. So I think what you're saying is very much resonating. I have one more question for you about kids. Garnering trust with our kids. I have this like picture of my relationship with my daughter, and she's an adult and we're friends, and she tells me things and she trusts me, and I can be there for her to listen and to give her advice if she asks for it. But I would assume that type of relationship starts when they're young. Maybe not. I mean, maybe it's never too late to improve relationships with your parents, but how can we raise kids that trust us from an early age?
I think when kids are born to us, they come out with this pull to trust the parent that they're with. And so that framework is already laid, that I trust what they're doing, what they're saying. And it's not really until the later years that becomes a question.
Yeah.
And I think it comes to a question when they see a lack of integrity, when they see hypocrisy. And so I think when you're able to have more healthy conversations with your kids, and you're able to get on their level, and you're able to bring them into the process, then they're going to see that they're going to respect that. Especially this usually comes up in the teenage years, because parents have to shift their role, that they're no longer the manager, they're the consultant. And so that's where the relationships get really, really strained. Yeah. Before that, I still think you can cultivate greater levels of relationship and trust. And it's when a parent is on their pedestal and doesn't let them see the mistakes and the failings. And also, when your child asks you to do something, how quick are you to turn them down? Do you give them a chance to let you persuade? Because persuasion and imagination are huge skills that benefit us long term. But if you're said, I said no because I said so, that's not letting them into any of the process. And that might not make them trust you less, but that's teaching them something. And some of the kids that are stronger-willed then will rebel later on. And some of the kids that aren't strong-willed will lack confidence because they weren't given the space to truly, be able to convince their parent to think differently. And so I think that a relationship that allows both people to feel like they're learning and they're teaching, that they're being guided. So I've learned so much from my children, and I affirm that in them. Like, they teach me so much. And so that's how they're getting their self-worth isn't being taken away. Their confidence isn't being taken away, that they feel that esteem because the person that they care about the most, or the people, the mom and dad that they care about most, they feel like they have some authority in the house, some agency, and that they have our mutual respect.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That is so fascinating. I've never thought about it that way, as like you are learning your persuasion skills, and you're from asking for things from your parents.
Yes, yeah.
So like if the kids are like, I want candy or I want this, instead of immediately shutting them down, give us a tangible example of this in action.
Yeah, my child asks for stuff all the time. And usually I will lean heavily on, I want to provide everything. And so I know that part of where I have to balance is being able to let them work for it. And one thing I've been really connected to is teaching value early on. So I read this study where generational wealth basically goes away within 2 to 3 generations usually. That. And so how to start teaching things early on so they have some buy-in. My son, he likes systems. And so if we go to the coffee shop on a Saturday and get a donut, let me rephrase. Dad gets him a donut.
Dad. Wait, I just had to tell the audience. Logan is our producer, and this is Logan's wife. So he's sitting in the room right now, and he's Dad.
Cookies, she does donuts.
Logan does cookies. Okay, got it.
He has the cookies and the donuts. So he'll talk to us about it, and so I don't say just no, we're not doing that, and he's like, why? And I just say, because I said so. It's a teaching moment where I say, we don't really want to have a donut every day because then it's not going to feel special.
Yes.
We're going over to the grandparents tonight. He always has ice cream there. They're addicted to ice cream. It's cute. It's cute. He knows what to expect. So would you rather have ice cream there or a donut here? So we don't offer him sweets every single day. We try to teach that balance, but we're not going to demonize sweets either. Before I did some of my personal work, that would have definitely been an area I would have been much more extreme on. And I see parents really extreme. And then what happens is you don't let them learn how to modify and modulate how much dopamine they're getting, or how much candy they're getting, or whatever it is. They don't learn to modulate on their own, so the pendulum swings, and then they become somewhat powerless for it.
Right.
So just that with sweets, or him asking, that will be something I'll try to teach him around, trying to teach him the structure of, it's not 100% like never to have sweets, but it's to realize it's special and it's celebratory. So be aware of when you want it.
And you're right, giving them the agency. Mm-hmm. Do you want it here or do you want it there? And then he gets a little bit of power and decision back in it.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's another concern from so many moms is teaching healthy behaviors around food. Because I think a lot of our behaviors around food are from when we were younger. That and body image, I think, are two of the two things that we are aware of could be a problem and often are a problem. And so how do we hedge that off early? I think what you said about the sweets and giving them agency and decision and explaining like, okay, it's not a no, always, but there is boundaries around this and here's why. Yeah. I think that's awesome.
Women, they carry shame primarily through physical appearance, and men carry shame through a sense of or perceived weakness. And so that's where, just knowing that research, that's where we can be really aware. So sometimes we're just being present to life and how it unfolds. And we have to have some level of awareness of, is this a problem for us? And if so, how are we projecting it onto the kids?
Yeah.
And many, many wonderful moms who try so hard, the body image and the sugar and all of that, it's based in like the desire to be nutritious and healthy and balanced, but it's coming with a high level of attachment and a high level of wounding and fear. And so that message can get really warped really, really quickly.
Yeah. What are the tools to help? Is that one of those things that you really have to unravel the shame for yourself in order to be a good parent and to raise a child with healthy behaviors around food and their body image? Is that just therapy?
It's always unfolding. Yeah. So I think when you decide that you want to be a conscious parent, you have to ask yourself, what are they here to teach me? So the second you ask that question, you realize that this is a reciprocal process, that you're here to teach them and they're here to teach you. And I do think children can be our greatest teachers. They are definitely the best reflectors. Just like our parents why do they bother us so much? It's because that reflection is so intense. And usually we are, when we're leading with fear, then parenting becomes a lot harder. Mm-hmm. So if you notice that you're fear-based, and you'll know this by how your body is. So when you're at peace, you're usually really open and relaxed, and your heart's open and you're present. When you're fear-based, you're mostly thinking of the future or the past. Your body's tight. You'll be moving a lot. You can see it in your body language. And so the first step is always just self-awareness. It's being able to be a little meta about things. So if you have an interaction with your child and you don't feel good after it, you have to ask, why don't I feel good about this? Is it how I handled it? Did I come too reactively? Did I not listen? And then you just, don't get into the habit of, I messed up. And so then you're just so focused on messing up that you're not actually doing the greater work of understanding, what do you want to improve?
Yeah.
And so I think about this, there's a term called alchemy, and it's basically chemistry of like how to turn lead into gold. And I think about that all the time. So when I go to sleep, I think, could I have said something better? Could I have handled something, with more consciousness or more, kindness? Mm-hmm. And because I come from being very, very perfectionist and very high achieving, so much of what drove me is trying to feel good enough. And when that switched to, I'm trying to refine constantly because I know my potential is greater than it is right now, that it wasn't coming from a lack, it was actually coming for a knowing that I could be more abundant in like peace or joy or fulfillment and all those things, then that really, really shifted how I parented. And so there's been many moments where, there's a popular child development psychology where they talk about how to create the whole brain to child. And one framework that they use is called the hands brain. And it's where, you teach children, like, this is your limbic brain, and this is when you get really emotional, then you're in your limbic, and then your prefrontal cortex is right here. And so they call it flipping your lid whenever you have a tantrum or a meltdown. And like when we're in conflict with our partner or we're too upset, it's literally flipping your lid. And I love that framework because it brings a little bit of humor and realization that, when we're just a little out of sorts, we're not handling things with the most amount of grace and patience that we can. And it's not about getting hard on ourselves or feeling shame about that. It's being able to refine it.
Right.
So the self-awareness of when you've done something that you don't feel good with, you're going to feel contracted. And as long as you sit with it and get a little understanding about where it's coming from and what to do next, then you realize you're still a work in progress.
Yes.
And that perfectionism, to be perfect, is a path, not a
destination.
Not a destination.
There is no, and as much as I try to internalize that, it's still difficult. It's still difficult to be like, okay, this is going to continue to happen. It's not like, I think maybe we all have this perfectionist fantasy that someday we'll work hard enough and we'll do enough and we'll do everything perfect, and then someday we'll be perfect and we won't feel all these human emotions, and we won't feel awful, or we won't feel fear, or we won't feel guilt, or we won't feel disappointment. And it's like, I think the journey is internalizing that that's always going to happen. And when you almost give space for that, it's like, okay, now I don't feel so resistant around it.
Right.
Like, I can let it be. I can let myself feel guilty. I'm not going to die from feeling guilty.
Yep.
Like, I'm not going to die from being in pain or fear or whatever. And I think that's something that I've currently done a lot of work on, and it's always evolving. But yeah. I think that's something that can really help a lot of parents.
Yeah. If we go towards the discomfort, it's just like with exercise. You're not really going to get stronger unless you feel uncomfortable. You have to have a certain level of resistance. And that's true of our mind and our soul, that we need a certain level of resistance. And so if we're shying away from what's uncomfortable, whether it's physical or mental or on any level, then we're not giving ourselves the possibility of really growing. Yeah. And so the second that you stick with that discomfort, like I overreacted to the children, then you're not really going to grow from it.
Yeah.
And so a common pattern is the numbing behaviors that to be a mom means that you're drinking a glass of wine every night, when that's it's like you're kind of numbing and blunting some of the learning and some of the processing you could be doing to then really not need that to feel, relaxed.
Right, because nighttime can be uncomfortable for a lot of people because that's when the chaos kind of slows down. And that's when you can start to reflect on what you did, what happened during the day. And that's when the uncomfortable feelings can kind of boil up because throughout the day you've been busy and you haven't had time to think about all the things. And then as soon as that happens, it's uncomfortable. And I mean, I'm guilty of like social media at night, or it's not wine anymore, but it used to be. And feeling the feelings from the day is hard.
Yeah.
And it's a skill
Oh, it is. Yeah.
you can improve.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about, and you've mentioned this several times, about feeling it physically in your body, and you will see signs of certain emotions physically in your body. I used to hear that and I'd be like, that's so woo-woo. It's not woo-woo. It's chemical. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So early on when I was in grad school, I had a professor who talked about the idea of if you go into an oncologist's office and it's breast cancer, the body posture of the patients is very different than you go into a cardiologist for heart issues.
Wow.
And so, that breast cancer is kind of connected to the idea like there's so much giving. So the shoulders are turned forward. And then the heart conditions are much more like the type A, like they're kind of leading with this sense of rigidity. And I thought that was really interesting in how our body reflects our state of mind. And so I can see this all the time if I'm sitting either with an individual or a couple and they're on the couch, what they're doing with their foot, what they're doing with their hands. You can see like how mental someone is, how much someone's just thinking, how comfortable they are. And so there's the little behavior cues like that where you're picking up body language. But think about, when we think the same thing over and over, it becomes a belief. So if our body is moving the same way over and over, it becomes a pattern. And that's where you see certain emotions held in different areas. And, going into this even a little further, there's wisdom traditions that are thousands and thousands of years old where, you hold certain emotions in different organs and such. And I've always found it interesting that I attract a lot of people who are similar to me. So who say yes a lot and no not a lot, and push themselves and just will spread themselves really thin. So the amount of people who have upper neck problems and shoulder problems. And then as I dove more into just the physiology of when it's the right shoulder versus the left shoulder, what does that mean? And in Eastern medicine, Chinese medicine, the right side is connected to the masculine and the left side is feminine. So most people lead with their right, and so you kind of just see then how the muscular system works on top of that. Then, just everything kind of is built on how we think. And so,
well, because if you're doing repetitively the same things over and over and over from a musculoskeletal standpoint, you can develop overuse in those areas, which can manifest in inflammation and pain. So again, I think a lot of people think that this is woo-woo, but it's really not.
Oh, yeah.
And it just goes to show that taking care of your mind and addressing some of these things can physically manifest in your body.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Now we just have good enough technology to be able to see it.
Yeah.
When I have women who need pelvic floor work, a lot of times they're disconnected from their pelvic floor, and it can be connected to sexual trauma or shame around sex.
Yeah.
Same with women with their hips, because there's a shame there, so there's a closing in. And so you just read the research and the statistics, and it's really interesting, right? It shows it can be considered somewhat soft science because it's not a completely controlled environment to understand variables.
It would be very difficult to study.
Yeah. But there's two of the books I love on this, and just the people who've advocated for this mind-body connection is Gabor Mate, who's incredible. He started off as a physician and now is a therapist. In his most recent book, The Myth of Normal, talks about all levels of just how the medical system and the very material system has pushed people into this disconnection to who we really are, and has created disjointed many, many issues.
Right. Wow.
And so he talks specifically about his work in surgery with people. And so it's people like that who've crossed over from hard medicine, rigidly pushed to the medical model, to more the understanding and the softer side of psychology and mental health and how it's all connected. So Myth of Normal, and then also The Body Keeps the Score, which is a huge book on how we hold certain energies in our body.
Yeah. I think this is all fascinating stuff, and probably we could have a separate podcast about that. And I also think I want to have you back about perfectionism, because I know that our audience struggles with that, and so maybe we do a separate episode specifically on perfectionism. Audience, y'all let me know if you want that. They're going to say yes. Casey, tell us how we can work with you, how the audience can find you.
I think the easiest way is Instagram, so at Casey Lepper. You can also email me, caseylepper@gmail.com. And happy to help, have different services for individuals, couples, and parents. So I love being able to just help someone have a better relationship with themselves so they can have a better relationship with their loved ones, their kids, and the world at large.
Yes. And she's a great follow on Instagram. Your content is so good.
Thank you.
It's Casey Lepper, on Instagram, right? Okay. You don't have a TikTok?
Logan, my husband, has set me up with a TikTok in the last 48 hours.
Good job. I was going to say, there's so many clips from this alone that you should put on TikTok.
I'm sure you're going to get many clips from him, extra.
So many. So I was going to say, I love this partnership we've got going on with you and Logan. Casey, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
This is awesome. And listeners, thank you so much for listening. We will see you all next week. Same time, same place. Bye for now.